Hi students. By now you should have watched the video about what to expect in this class this semester. This shorter video is designed to introduce you or reintroduce you maybe to an important concept called the canon. The canon, or the literary canon, is a body of literary works, novels, plays, poems, short stories, as well as their authors that are widely considered to be excellent. So if you think of the big names in literature, the ones that you would expect all of your English professors to know about, they're probably traditionally part of the canon. This is a concept that matters because it helps to determine whose work we read, whose work gets taught in classes like ours, whose work gets published. It also determines whose work the next generation will read. So this is an important concept. So let's shift gears just a little bit. This is a picture of a deck of cards I got a few years ago at a toy store. As an English professor, I saw this American Authors card game, and of course I had to have it. So you can see on the face of each card is a different author. Right here in the Seven of Hearts is the author F. Scott Fitzgerald. He's a big one, right? He wrote The Great Gatsby, a novel that maybe you have read. If that's the case, you'll be reading it again this semester. It is on the syllabus, as you've probably noticed, right? This is a big novel, The Great Gatsby. In fact, a lot of scholars and literary critics agree that it's one of the best novels to have been published in American literature. It's a big deal. So let's take a look at what else is in this deck of cards. Here we go. So we've got a whole range of authors here. We have some authors that come earlier in the timeline of American literature. Our class starts in 1865, so we've got writers like Whitman and Melville who come earlier than that. But we've also got some authors here that we're going to be reading, like Henry James, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway down in the bottom right corner, kind of behind the video. Some great American literature. So what else do you notice? What do you notice about these pictures when you look at them? Well, one thing that you might notice is that these guys are all dead. So in this particular version of excellent authors of the canon, apparently you have to be dead for a long time to qualify as a great author. You'll also notice that they are almost all men. There's one woman, Willa Cather, who wrote novels about 100 years ago, amazing author that we won't have time for this semester. And there's only one writer of color, a black author, James Baldwin, who we will read later this semester. These are all amazing authors, right? But it's an overwhelmingly white, dead white male vision of literary excellence. Now, this is not to take anything away from any one of these authors. They are all wonderful authors. They have all influenced literary tradition. If you have time to read every single one of these authors, I would recommend it. But the problem, of course, is that when authors are missing from this tradition, when they're excluded, when they're left out, it doesn't tell the whole story. If we have a vision of the canon that is exclusively or almost exclusively dead white men, then we're missing out on a lot. This became a big deal in recent decades when literary scholars started rethinking what they wanted to teach, what they wanted to require of English majors. Every once in a while, you'll hear a story about an Ivy League school. I think lately it might have been Princeton University that decided not to require its English majors to take a semester of Shakespeare. This is a controversial thing, right? What should educated people read? What should English majors read? What should get taught in classes like this? If we want to add more authors and there's only so much time in a semester, who gets left out? These are difficult discussions, but some conclusions that have widely been agreed on in recent decades in literary study are first, that the ability to write and publish literature depends on access to money and power to a certain degree, right? You have to have a decent enough education to write. You have to have access to publishers. You have to have the time to write. If you're an enslaved person, like Frederick Douglass was, you don't have access to these things, right? So you see how traditionally people were excluded from these things. That's changed a lot in recent years, obviously. Another conclusion that's been drawn is that there's more than one way to be excellent. So somebody might think the work of Ezra Pound is absolutely excellent, and judging by a certain set of standards, it is. But who gets left out if we're only looking for certain characteristics? So expanding what we look for and different ways to think about excellence has been part of the discussion. Also, as you know, ideas of excellence can change with time. Now, we've all heard about timeless classics because they speak across generations, they withstand the test of time. But it's also true that there are certain trends that come and go in literature, like in fashion or music. And those ideas of excellence can change with time. And finally, a conclusion that's been widely agreed upon is that literary study is best when it's inclusive, when we tell our whole story, when we include the dead white guys, but also more women authors, more non-binary authors, more writers of color, and tell a fuller story about American literary tradition and American culture. What does this have to do with us? Well, as you know from an earlier video, this is a survey class, and it's meant to give you a broad understanding of American literature, right? So all literature classes are shaped by the canon and shape the canon. We continue to have an influence on what further generations will read when we figure out what we want to assign and teach in these classes. Our reading list for this survey class is a mix of authors. We've got the traditional canon, right? We've got the big heavyweights like Mark Twain and Henry James and Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. But we're also going to look at a few authors who were extremely well received and well regarded in their time, who kind of came out of fashion for a while and have since been rediscovered and reconsidered. And they have now re-earned a place in the canon. Authors like Mary Louise Wilkins Freeman and Kate Chopin. And of course, our class goes all the way up to the present, right? So we'll be reading some new and acclaimed authors. We'll see. It's too soon to say if they'll be in the canon 50 years from now. But our class covers all of these groups of authors. Okay. I'm looking forward to reading all of these texts with you this semester. Let me know if you have any questions.